Okay, before we jump into chapter 6 of A Night Divided, just a quick reminder that you should have your annotation sheet nearby, and I encourage you to take great notes. I'm not going to guide you through taking those notes because I've already modeled that for you several times now. So I want you to make sure that you're taking, paying close attention as you're reading and taking great notes, such as, making inferences, paying attention to context clues, making notes about questions you have and finding answers to them, making connections, making predictions, all of those good things that would be helpful for you in your comprehension. Okay, this starts out with a quote by Erich Honecker, the first secretary of East Germany from 71 to 89. And he said, "The wall will be standing in 50 and even 100 years if the reasons for it are not removed." Okay, that's quite a threat. He's saying that wall is not coming down until you comply. You do what we want you to. So, pretty good threat there. Okay, it was a Beatles night. And before we go any further, the Beatles are who? Yeah, a huge rock band from the 1960s, right? And if you remember in the last chapter, or maybe it was 2 chapters ago, they mentioned how in East Germany, a lot of things from the West, such as Western music, like the Beatles and other music, books, magazines, all of those things, they were outlawed in East Germany. So these things had to be smuggled in and sold on the black market. And so Beatles was contraband. You can't really have that. But nevertheless, it was a Beatles night. Fritz lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, while I sat cross-legged on the floor with the book I had given up on reading. In the background, John Lennon, he's the lead singer of the Beatles, harmonized with Paul McCartney as they sang philosophies of love in a language I barely understood. If it weren't for the Beatles, I wouldn't have known any English at all. For me, it's the lyrics. Fritz had taken an English course in school and spoke it much better than I did. The things they write could never be played here. Of course not, I said with a smile. It'd corrupt us. Personally, I preferred the tunes, although mostly I liked the Beatles simply because we weren't supposed to like them, or for that matter, even know about them. But all the kids did, Fritz's friends especially. The boys smuggled in albums top of page 36 is where we are. Smuggled in albums we weren't supposed to have, and pictures of shiny Ford Mustangs we'd never own. And the girls got fashion magazines and colorful beaded necklaces to hide under their mattresses. Even though she never stopped Fritz and wouldn't turn anyone in, Mama disapproved. She wanted us to buy the censored albums instead. Okay, this word censored. Okay, obviously we can look at the context clues here and understand that, they're not supposed to have albums like the Beatles, but there are other albums which are censored that are okay, right? So these are the things, these censored albums are the ones that the government approves of. So you can make an inference that censored albums are albums where they've taken out the bad stuff on it, or the stuff that the communists don't want you to know about, right? And that's what censored means. It means to remove material that is deemed inappropriate, right? But that missed the whole point of rock and roll. Nobody wanted approved music. Okay, good. There's another context clue right there, right? The censored stuff is approved. I wondered if maybe Mama wasn't angry that I had seen Dominic. Maybe it made her sad. Maybe because nothing she could do would bring him home again. I never should have told her about Dom at supper and never should have yelled. Fritz must have been thinking about that too. Mama loves them as much as you do, Goethe. She misses them so much it hurts her to talk about them. You can't be angry with her that father is gone. He was right, of course. I didn't want to be angry, but sometimes it was the only emotion I understood. I missed my father singing to me at bedtime and the earthy smell of his coat before he left for work each morning. Sometimes he snuck a kiss from my mother when he thought no one was looking, and it always made me giggle. I even missed Dominic, the way he used to tease me and hide my dolls and jump out from behind corners to scare me. Those were good memories now. And that's how it'll be with your brothers and sisters. You fight with them nowadays. When you get older to be adults, they become some of your best friends. Our family was like a house of cards in a stiff wind, and when it became too much to feel the pain of our collapse, all I could do was become angry. Top of page 37. We need to get to the West, to be with them, I said. There's got to be a way through that wall. Of course there is. But the only way to know for sure is to try, and there's a high price for being wrong. Are you so certain there's a way through that you'd risk dying for it? I wanted to say yes. More than anything, I wanted to be the kind of person who dared to say yes. Papa would take the risk, maybe Fritz too. But I wasn't sure about myself. If I knew we'd make it, then yeah, I'd try to cross. Then I added, but that's all the bravery inside me. That's not how bravery works, Fritz said. Courage isn't knowing you can do something, it's only being willing to try. His voice trailed to silence, and the record player spat out static in the gap before the next song began. The needle on the player was going dull. It would be a long time before Fritz lucked into finding another one. Shortages. Always shortages, right? So remember, their stores don't have enough inventory. They don't have enough supplies and things to buy. They're in communist countries. Once the music began again, Fritz rolled over to face me and rested his chin on his hands. I gotta tell you something, he said. I wasn't going to, but if you really believe there's a way through the wall, you ought to hear this. I leaned forward, certain this was the secret he had kept from Mama at supper time. Do you know Peter Warner, Anna's older brother? All right, remember, who's Anna? Yeah, Anna is Goethe's best friend. Okay, top of page 38. Sure. I didn't know him well because he was so much older. He was away at the university, but I saw him occasionally on weekends. As the first in his family to attend a university, Peter made their parents very proud, and they talked about him all the time. Peter is going to the West tonight. Nobody knows about it but me. I sat up straight. Not even his family? They'll be furious. He hopes they'll understand and maybe even be happy for him. I paused, letting that sink in. Then I asked, how is he getting out? Some students in the West got a pass to come to East Berlin for a museum tour. They're going to smuggle him out in their car. It was specially designed just for that reason. I shook my head. It sounds dangerous. It is. But where we live, walking can be dangerous. Talking is dangerous. For you and me, being the children of Aldous Lowe is dangerous. And remember, who's Aldous Lowe? Yeah, that's Goethe and Fritz's father. That's why he never sends letters. Just because of who our father is, they probably watch you from the moment you step out of this apartment until you get inside again. If the chance came for me to leave the same way Peter is leaving, I'd take it. I felt a pinch in my chest. It was one thing to think about Anna's brother leaving, but I couldn't imagine if Fritz left too. Would he just disappear like Peter? Top of page 39. I was about to ask when a knock came to our door. Fritz looked over at me and with a stern voice said, "Don't say a word about this. Don't make Mother responsible for knowing." When I agreed, he got up and opened the door. Mama pushed past him and turned the volume down on the record player. "They'll hear you on the streets." "Not with the windows closed," Fritz said irritably. "Besides, the police have better things to do than confiscate teenage music." "And how do you know that?" Only because they haven't come here yet to do it, that's all." Fritz nodded and then switched off the player. Neither of us was enjoying it now anyway. "Off to bed, Goethe," Mama told me. "You too, Fritz." I got up off the floor and gave Fritz a long look before leaving. Mama stopped me in the doorway and put her hands on my shoulders. "I'm sorry I became upset before," she said. "I was only worried that you might have been caught by one of the border guards. Can you understand that?" Yes, that I understood. "I am glad you saw Dominic," she said. "I wish I could have seen him too." "He looked good," I said. "He's as tall as Fritz is now, and he looked healthy." "Did he seem happy?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer that. He must have ached, top of page 40. He must have ached about the divide in our family, just as all of us here did. But he was also free, and I wasn't sure he would give that up, even to be back with us again. So I only shrugged the question away, which seemed enough for her. She kissed my forehead and then said, "Now, good night and sleep well." I wished her a good night too, but I knew there was no chance of sleeping well. Sometime in the next few hours, the brother of my best friend would vanish into the West. I whispered a prayer that God would see him there safely, and then carry his family through the storm that was sure to follow his disappearance. Okay, we're already on to chapter 7. Let's go. Next quote is, "There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous. Okay, this was written by a German political theorist named Hannah Arendt. Okay, no dangerous thoughts, just thinking is dangerous. All right, Anna said nothing about her brother on the walk to school the next morning. I didn't think she would. He lived at the university, and it would probably be a while before anyone in her family knew he'd left. I wondered if Peter had left behind a note of explanation, or if he would send word to them once he was free. I wondered how they'd feel afterward. Proud of his courage or ashamed that he'd abandoned them. And I wanted to know if Peter would ever look back with regret for what he had done. Would I, if it were me who left? I glanced at Anna's cheerful expression and felt a rash of guilt for knowing what she did not know. Sorry, for knowing what she did not. It's just as cold today, she said. Hopefully it will begin to feel like spring soon. The weather was trivial. So were the books in her hands and her annoyance with the boy who pulled her hair when the teacher wasn't looking. Anna wasn't even thinking about, top of page 42. Anna wasn't even thinking about her brother today. And all I could think about was whether he was still alive. Are you feeling okay, Gerda? Anna often preferred to interpret my moodiness as illness. It was the way she tried to understand me. Springtime, sure. Was that even what she'd asked? My mind was at Checkpoint Charlie, where Peter would have crossed into the West. Okay, this was a very famous gate at the border where people would try to, if you did have a pass or a license to go through the border, you would go through Checkpoint Charlie. This is on the American side of West Berlin, okay? And so that she's thinking that's where Peter must have passed through. Fritz said the car had been specially designed to hide him, but the border guards always searched carefully, and they had dogs, and maybe other detection devices as well. I tried to picture Peter sitting in a coffee shop with the other students right now, laughing at how easy it had all been. But I couldn't laugh. Not yet. What if you had the chance to go to the West? I suddenly asked Anna. Would you? Anna stopped and glanced around to see if anyone was nearby. When she was sure we were alone, she started walking again, then said, Don't ask questions like that. Don't even think questions like that. It was wise advice, though I could never stop my thoughts from coming. They just did, all the time. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to stop them. I knew I wasn't. As we approached the same area where I had seen Dominic yesterday, I looked around for any border police. At least for now, the street was empty. Then I turned toward, top of page 43, then I turned toward the platform on the west, but nobody was there. Still, I shuffled my feet and walked slower, just in case. Anna seemed to know what I was doing and grabbed my arm. Please don't, Gerda. He won't come back after seeing you get in trouble yesterday. Maybe not, but I still had to hope. Help me keep an eye out for guards, and we won't get in trouble, I said. Anna huffed, but she began looking around. We couldn't walk as slowly as I wanted. Other students were on our heels, trying to get to school before this cold rain turned to snow. I kept my head down, except for the occasional peek to my right. There was nothing, and then nothing again. And then, just before we passed by, Dominic's blonde head rose into sight. I stopped, but didn't wave. Anna gasped and told me not to look. I ignored that and replied, He's my brother. I'll bet Officer Mueller has family on the other side too. You can't split a city in half and not divide everyone in some way. Dom didn't wave this time. Instead, he motioned at someone below him to come up. I barely breathed as I anticipated who it must be. My father! His head rose higher with every step up the platform ladder. He wore glasses now, and his light brown hair seemed thinner. It seemed odd to finally see him. So remember, how long has it been? Yeah, over 4 years. Looking as much as top of page 44. Sorry, did I read that last part wrong? Looking much as I remembered him. Yet it had been so long, I felt I scarcely knew him anymore. He waved only once and wiped a tear from his eyes with the back of his hand. I think I needed to see that, to know he missed me as desperately as I missed him. But then he did something I didn't expect. He danced. Not the formal dances the adults knew, but the silly dance he used to do for me all those years ago. The one from The Farmer in March. Remember, that was the song that he was singing her to sleep that night when he tucked her in. He started by pantomiming the farmer's wife telling the maids to get back to work. His movements were from the song's second verse. We had sung this so many times together when I was younger that the lyrics and actions were etched into my brain. It still ran through my head sometimes at night when he wasn't there to tuck me in. They have a lot to do in the home and the garden, the song went. They dig and they rake and they sing a song. My mouth formed the words even as he performed, and the cheery tune rang in my mind. With that second line, my father pretended to hold a shovel and dig, but when he should have moved to the rake, he only continued the digging motions, looking up at me very deliberately, and then made a silly bow, just as he had when we used to do the song together years earlier. I smiled and acted out an applause, just as I used to do. Then he motioned that I should leave and keep on walking. Top of page 45, I nodded obediently, faced forward again, and then Anna and I walked away. You could have gotten us arrested just now, she scolded me. And for what? A silly dance? Papa was playful like that. It used to be my favorite song. But Anna shook her head. He wouldn't have you take that risk just to show you a dance. No, he wouldn't. It took me the whole school day to think about it, while the others dutifully studied geometry, Russian vocabulary, and whatever else we learned that day. I considered Anna's suggestion that perhaps there had been a message in his words. Why had Papa chosen to pantomime from the middle of the song? If he had wanted me to think about this time of year, March, then the beginning of the song would have made more sense. And if he had danced just to bring up the fun memories, the final verse was the silliest to perform. So why choose the middle? I figured it out during reading time that afternoon, 45 minutes in which I could not recall a single word I'd read. It came down to the mistake Papa had made in his performance. Where he should have changed from a shovel to a rake, he only kept digging. And that was the end of his dance. He was digging. Papa wanted me to dig. But why? Top of page 46, which starts us off on chapter 8. Let's go right in. Ooh, exciting stuff. Okay, this quote says, fear was the most powerful weapon possessed by the Stasi. Okay, remember who were the Stasi? The secret police. Okay, so they make people fearful. This was written by a British author, so someone over in the England area, named David Cook. Years ago, Mama and some other women in our building used to garden in a small patch of dirt behind our apartment. They enjoyed the work, and the food from the garden was very good. But one year, the food shortages had been particularly fierce, and the harvest disappeared into the hands of those who walked by it each day. So people were stealing food out of their garden. Mama never gardened again, said it wasn't worth the bother. I found the shovel after school, right where she had left it. It was tucked in a forgotten corner of the basement, along with the things other families in our building had no room for upstairs. There were many boxes and crates and dusty surplus tins left over from the war that probably weren't even edible anymore. Nobody ever went down here, though. The corners always stayed dark, and every time I came, it felt like the roof and dirt floor were closer to each other than the time before. Okay, top of page 47. Although my instinct was to leave the basement as soon as possible, I forced myself to stay and stare at the shovel, as if another hard look would somehow help me understand what Papa wanted me to do. Perhaps he wanted me to encourage Mama to start gardening again, or for me to plant one myself. No, I didn't think so. He had pantomimed the lyrics for digging, not for planting. Digging. Maybe before he left, he had buried some sort of treasure nearby. Papa must be worried about our family, and of course, he would want to take care of us. Well, he didn't need to worry. Fritz's after-school bricklaying job helped us with money. Sure, we didn't have a television, but Anna did if there was anything I really wanted to watch. Most of our entertainment came from Fritz's record player, which was good enough most of the time. And we had no trabant like other families. But it was okay to walk where we needed to go. And besides, they were ugly cars anyway. Okay, super fantastic context clues right here to help us figure out what a trabant is, okay? It says they don't have a trabant, but they're okay to walk where they need to go. And those were ugly cars anyway. So what's a trabant? Yeah, it's a car. And this was actually a car, a German car that was made by the communists. And it was only sold in Germany because no other countries wanted them. They would break down all the time. They were just awful cars. Because remember, they didn't want to import anything from the West. Okay. Still, if Papa had some sort of treasure buried in the area, I wanted to find it. I hoped to see him again at the viewing platform soon so I could try to figure out where to dig. Fritz didn't get home that night by supper, which was unusual. But sometimes his bricklaying required extra time at work, and so Mama and I didn't think much of going ahead without him. He would probably get back before supper was finished. Top of page 48. This is better anyway. Mama's shoulders seemed heavier than usual, and just seeing them made mine feel heavy too. I had some very sad news at work today and wanted to share it with you in private. I set down my fork and looked over at her. I couldn't imagine what must have happened, and already a pit was forming in my stomach. Your friend, Anna, has an older brother, doesn't she? A boy named Peter? If she had not spoken another word, I would have already known how Mama's story was going to end. I wanted to press my hands over my ears, pretending if I couldn't hear it, then it didn't happen. But life never works that way, and all I could do was close my eyes and pray that I was wrong. Anna's parents got a visit from the Stasi this afternoon. Peter attempted an escape last night, hidden in a special panel of a car from the west. He was discovered before reaching the border and tried to make a run to the west, but they shot him in the back. In all the confusion, the students driving the car were able to escape, but Peter didn't make it. Mama grabbed my hand and gave it a squeeze. Anna probably got the news once she came home from school. The family has been allowed a day home tomorrow to mourn his loss, but this will be a terrible time for them. I thought you should know. It's a reminder to us all of what happens to those who try to escape. They die. Page 49. Tears rolled from my cheeks, but I didn't care if Mama saw. I couldn't begin to imagine the pain that Anna and her family must be feeling right now. She loved her brother just as much as I loved both of mine. Losing one of them would feel like my whole world was coming to an end. Fritz would feel awful too. He'd feel guilty for knowing Peter's plans and not stopping him. Wait, Fritz had known, and he still wasn't home. Why isn't Fritz back from work? I tried not to sound as worried as I was. After all, he had been late before, but not often, and Fritz had said nobody knew Peter's secret but him. What if Fritz had tried to escape too? Although she had only the smallest understanding of why my face was suddenly flushed and hands were shaking, Mama said she knew I was upset and asked if I needed some time alone. I left the table and practically ran into Fritz's room. I had half expected to see a note on his pillow too, some words of apology and explanation for his own escape attempt. There was nothing, so maybe it was just my imagination. But every minute that passed sharpened my worries. Fritz was never this late. I reappeared in the kitchen, where my mother was finishing cleaning up, except for a plate she had left out for Fritz. Can we go to his job site and look for him? I asked. Please, Mama, can we go and find him? Top of page 50. Okay, try to make an inference here. We know that Gerda is very upset. She is worried. She's sad about Peter, about Anna's older brother, but she's now very worried about Fritz. And there could be, one of the reasons is she's worried he went with Peter and escaped to the west, that he's gone, right? And could she have some other worries too? Try to make an inference or a prediction about what other worries there may be. Okay, top of page 50. Mama pressed her eyebrows together. Gerda, I know the news about Anna's brother upset you, but Fritz and Peter were friends, I said. Fritz knew about the escape. Without another word, Mama set down her dish rag and hurried to get a coat. Minutes later, we were outside, pressing through the busy city streets, deeper into East Berlin, where Fritz had been hired to help lay bricks for a new building. So much of Berlin had been destroyed in the war, and even now, 20 years later, piles of rubble were still strewn about the city. The government was rebuilding as quickly as they could, but it took a lot of resources to maintain the wall. Their second priority was rebuilding public places or areas near the border that were meant to show the world how superior our system was. It was behind the glossy scenes that everything remained in ruins. Okay, the communists really did this. Like near the borders of Berlin, they would make the buildings look nice and beautiful and freshly painted. It was all just a facade to make it seem as though they were doing well and that things were great in East Berlin. But behind that area, things were shabby and gray. Communist gray is what they would call it when you couldn't repaint things and things started to just get shabby and old. Okay, every day after school, Fritz had been working on one of those high profile buildings, and they were in a hurry because of some visitors coming from Moscow. A few men were still on the job site when Mama and I got there, but Fritz was clearly not one of them. She told me to stay back while she talked to the job foreman. I hated being left behind, but a man in his position wouldn't want me in the conversation. So I waited where I could see their faces as my stomach twisted into knots. Top of page 51. In response to Mama's question, the foreman shook his head and his mouth was turned in a distinct frown. He checked his watch and then spoke to her some more. Even from here, I could tell that nothing he had to say was good. Where was Fritz? I wanted to scream. Why were they just standing there, talking? Finally, Mama's back stiffened and she clutched at a handkerchief in her fist, but she only nodded, looking as if she wanted to scream too. The foreman reached out a hand as if he might try to comfort her, but Mama stepped back, said a few more words, and then turned. Without speaking, she grabbed my hand and yanked me into a walk so fast that to keep up with her, I almost had to jog along. Where is he? I asked. Mama, where? Hush. Wait until we get home. The walk to the job site had taken less than a half hour, and though we were moving much faster now, it seemed like hours before we finally entered the safety of the apartment building. I asked again what the foreman had said, but by then it took all Mama's effort just to hold her emotions together. She didn't say a word until we were inside our own apartment, and her trembling fingers had locked the door behind us. Then she collapsed onto the ground, and sobs poured out of her. Oh, wow. So sad. Okay, top of page 52. So remember, this poor woman, Goethe's mother, has lost her husband and her one son, and then obviously something terrible, right? We can make an inference that something bad has happened to Fritz. The Stasi came to get him today, she said through choked breaths. They believe he was involved in Peter's escape attempt. They took him away. What will they do to him? I once overheard Papa telling my mother that he wasn't afraid of anything except our secret police. He said that if he were ever arrested, no matter what they did to him, his life would be over. I didn't know a lot about what happened to people after the Stasi got them. The only people who knew for sure were either the agents or people subjected to their interrogations or tortures. Okay, an interrogation is when they're asking you questions in a very threatening way, or they sometimes would torture people. They rarely talked about what had happened to them if they ever returned. Even the locations of Stasi prisons were secret, so I knew Mama couldn't answer any of my questions. But Fritz was her son. Even if it was only based on instinct, she had to have some answers, some way to make this better. Except I had learned long ago that there were some things even a mother couldn't fix. She couldn't bring Papa and Dom back, or bring us to them. She couldn't keep me from missing them every single day, and nobody I knew could bring down that wall. All my mother said was, they told Fritz it was only for questioning, but the foreman doesn't know if that's true. Then she turned to me. Are you sure Fritz knew about Peter's escape? He told me last night. And you waited this long to say anything? Top of page 53. By the time Fritz told me, Peter had already left. I'm sorry, Mama. She closed her eyes and the tears ran beneath her lashes like the steady leak of a pipe. I put my arms around her, hoping to comfort her a little. Go to bed, Goethe. I didn't want to. It wasn't my bedtime yet, and I wanted more than anything to stay awake until Fritz came home, if he came home. I'm going to Herr Kraus's apartment next door, Mama said. He will know if there's anything we can do. We didn't see Herr Kraus as often as we used to, not since Papa left. Mama had brought him dinners after his wife died last year. Okay, so remember, he had an invalid wife. She was a very sickly woman. She was often in bed. And remember, 4 years have passed since the beginning of the book. So after 3 years, his wife had died if she died last year. But she also felt it was dangerous for the Stasi to believe that we were anything more than casual neighbors. If she wanted to see him now, then I knew how frightened she was for Fritz. Let me come too, I said. You've done enough, Mama snapped. Then her eyes softened. I didn't mean that. Please, go to bed. I kissed her cheek, though I'm sure she didn't feel it, and apologized again, though I wasn't exactly sure what I'd done wrong. On the way to my bedroom, I passed Fritz's room. The door was closed tight, which I found odd because it hadn't been when we left. Maybe he'd come home while we were out. Maybe. Or could someone else have closed the door? That's kind of an inference I'm making based on some of those clues. Okay, top of page 54. I turned the handle and darted in, fully expecting to see Fritz lying on his bed with his Beatles album turned low. I saw that record first, smashed on his floor like someone had crushed it beneath his boot. Fritz had a poster of Anne Margaret on his wall. She's an American actress, so that would have been illegal too. Supposedly a popular actress in America, but that had been ripped down and nothing but the tacked-in corners remained. The rest of his room was in disarray, with drawers pulled out and books thrown onto his bed, but nothing else seemed to be damaged. The Stasi had been here. They had stood right where I now did, and maybe gone through our entire apartment too. Although it should have shocked me more, somehow this too seemed normal. I told you to go to bed, Mama called from the front room. I almost asked her to come and see what had happened, but a voice inside me warned it would be too much for her tonight. I planned to get up extra early in the morning and clean it for her. Then, when Fritz came home, and I had to believe he would, everything would be okay again. Whether that was true or not, I chose to believe. I made myself believe it, or the worry would drive me insane. Okay, we're going to jump right into page 55, chapter 9. The penalties for being an accessory to the attempt to flee the GDR, remember that's the name of their government, were greater than the crime of trying to flee itself. By Anna Funder, Australian author. A cold rain was falling early the next morning, making it hard to leave my bed. It didn't help that I had barely slept, and whatever sleep I got was filled with nightmares about Fritz. When I finally did drag myself into the front room, I was surprised to see him seated closely beside Mama on the couch. He looked exhausted and had a dark bruise on his cheek where someone must have hit him. From what I'd heard about the Stasi's brutal methods of questioning, he was lucky if that's all they had done. Mama and Fritz were sitting in silence, and at first neither said anything to me when I walked in. I called his name and ran toward him, but he put a finger to his lips to quiet me and shook his head in warning. Oh, good. You're awake, Goethe. Mother spoke deliberately, and her words were far too cheerful to fit the situation. Top of page 56. Why might Mother be having a different tone than you would expect? We should have a nice breakfast to celebrate Fritz coming home. Celebrate his coming home? The Stasi had arrested him and obviously questioned him by force. Maybe we were grateful, but to call this a celebration sounded like a word they would want us to use. To hear it from my mother's mouth felt strained and unnatural. It's a cold morning. Fritz wasn't quite as cheery as Mama had sounded, but his tone also didn't match his bruise or the heavy bags under his eyes. Maybe I'll build us a fire while you cook. Help me with it, Goethe. Anna's apartment was newer than ours and had central heating, which was considered a great luxury. So they can't even turn the heater on in their home. They have no heater. They have to light a fire every time they want heat. I envied her every winter when we had to collect wood to burn for our heat, which never reached all the way into my small bedroom. But except for the rain, I didn't think this morning was particularly cold. We wouldn't normally use up valuable wood to warm an apartment we'd all be leaving for the day, which meant something more was going on. Fritz stacked a few sticks of wood in our fireplace and grabbed a handful of papers to use as kindling. He picked up the first paper, and I saw his handwriting on it, which said, "Be careful what you say. The apartment is bugged." Okay, what does bugged mean? Yeah, they've got microphones and wires in there. They're listening to what the Lowe family says. Bugged? 1,000 questions instantly leapt into, top of page 57, leapt into my mind. Where were the microphones? How long had they been here? Who was listening to them? He knew I'd read it because my eyes were wide with fear. Then he crumpled up the paper and stuffed it into the middle of the wood stack. The next paper had already been written out for Mama. It said, the Stasi knew about a private conversation between me and Gerta the other night. They listened to every word we say. They listened to every word we say in here. My mouth went dry. I remembered listening to the Beatles, and I was sure we had complained about the GDR, because we usually did at night. That same conversation in Fritz's bedroom was where I had told Mama the details about seeing Dominic. She had come in unexpectedly, cutting off our conversation about Peter. Fritz said Peter had told no one else about his escape, and Fritz had told nobody about it but me. We were the reason they had caught him, the reason he was killed. Tears filled my eyes, and I shook my head, horrified at what all of this meant. But Fritz had a paper for that, too. He rummaged through a few in his stack until he found one that said, "We didn't know, but we do now, and we'll be more careful. We must sound happy." We'd gone too long without speaking, and Fritz called out, "Gerta and I will have this fire going soon. Then I'll," top of page 58, "then I'll shower, and we can go to school. Maybe since Anna won't be at school today, I can walk Gerta there." "That's a good idea," Mama said. "Although we'll both be at work after school, Gerta. I expect you to come straight home today." "Yes, Mama." I croaked the words out, and it felt as though I were speaking them directly into a microphone, which I supposed I was. Everything around me felt forced, and I didn't see how Mama and Fritz were just carrying on like normal. No, it wasn't normal. We never talked like this. Mama didn't make celebratory meals, and we wouldn't have celebrated his release from the Stasi anyway. And Fritz never walked me to school, whether Anna was with me or not. But there we were, an hour later, with Fritz walking beside me without throwing distance of within throwing distance of the wall. I used to think this was the last place we could talk freely, but now it seemed like the only place. Beneath the shared umbrella, our conversation was as private as it possibly could be. Still, we kept our voices low. "I heard about Peter's death yesterday while at school," Fritz said. "A friend told me the Stasi was interviewing his parents and that they might be arrested too." "For what crime?" I asked. "Peter tried to escape, not them." "The Stasi view escape on the same level as treason." So, top of page 59. And treason is a charge of when you're doing things against the government. "They'll embarrass and shame Peter's family now. They'll have to work extra hard to prove their loyalty to the state." An older couple was passing by us, so Fritz and I fell silent. When we were alone again, Fritz said, "When I heard about Peter's death, I knew the only thing I could do was keep my head down and hope nobody remembered that we were friends. I got through the end of school, but Stasi officers were waiting for me the minute I arrived at work. They said it was only for a few questions, but I knew otherwise." "What did they do to you?" Fritz lowered his head. Clearly, he didn't want to answer that question, not even for me. By then, we were passing the platform where I had seen Dominic and Papa yesterday, but they weren't there this time. I had been so sure they would come. After all, if Papa was trying to send me a message, then why wouldn't he be here? Especially today, of all days. Maybe it was for the best. Even from the distance between us, Papa might have been able to see the dark bruise under Fritz's eye. It would worry him. "There's something more I have to tell you," Fritz said, "and Mother doesn't know about this part, so don't say a word to her about it." "I won't." It wasn't the first secret we'd kept from her. "They showed me a huge file they're still keeping on Father. Before he left, the Stasi documented everything," top of page 60. "The Stasi documented everything about him. Where he went after work, who his friends were, even what newspapers he brought back from the West when he visited there. They never found anything serious he had done, but were sure it was just a matter of time before they had a reason to arrest him." This wasn't a surprise. Papa had told me the same thing himself, and we'd had the visits from Stasi agents to our apartment. Papa knew he was being tracked because of his part in the uprising, and because he continued to speak to others who wanted more uprisings in the future. But he never committed any crimes or incited anyone to violence. Papa wasn't a violent man, just a thoughtful one. Fritz continued. Then they showed me another file, one with my name on it. I stopped walking to stare at him. Why? What have you done? Nothing. Or at least I didn't think I had, but they know Papa is in the West now, and so they're watching us to see if he contacts me, or if his friends do. Maybe one day I'll happen to bump into someone who used to know him. If anyone even asks about Father, someone is bound to hear it, and then that report will go into my file. Well, if you haven't done anything wrong, then they can't make your file as big as they want. If you obey all the rules, everything will be fine, right? I looked over, hoping to see him agree with me. Isn't that right, Fritz? Top of page 61. But he shook his head and lowered his voice to almost a whisper. They told me what the file means. I've been branded a potential enemy of the state. It doesn't matter to them if I've done anything wrong. They just figure I will one day. With that file, I won't be allowed to go to a university or to get a good job. By the end of June, I'll be old enough for the military. And before they put a gun in my hand, that file means I'll get special training until they're sure I believe the way they do. Once I wear their uniform, I'll get the most dangerous assignments, the ones few people survive. That file means I have no chance in life. None. They've already determined that I will fail. All because of Papa? I asked. None of that's your fault. I'm not blaming him, Fritz said. I smuggled in that Beatles record and that banana on your birthday and other stuff you don't know about. Nothing bad, but nothing I'd want to get caught with either. They must have heard me complain about the government every night on their microphones, and I've never made it any secret that I don't want to join the military. My file might have started because of Father, but I'm the one who's been filling it. Well, I won't let you fail, I said stubbornly. If you can't get a job, then you'll live with me. If they brainwash you, then I'll talk you out of it when you come home. Whatever they do to you, Mama and I will be there to help. Top of page 62. Fritz rubbed the top of my head with his hand. Usually, I hated that, but not this time. It was his way of showing affection, and I wanted that comfort from him now. Then he sighed and said, You don't understand how bad it is, Goethe. They have a file on you, too. Wow. Okay, that's some devastating information. Okay, we're going to continue with chapter 10 on the next video.